Welcome to lecture 20 of International Finance. We are continuing our discussion on the topic of balance of payment. So first let's review the contents that we are going to cover in this lecture. In previous video we discussed what balance of payment is, right? What BOP is, and then we saw that this BOP is divided into current account and capital account, right? Or what we called financial account. In this video, and then we further divided this current account uh, into balance of trade and the factor income. Then we had the unilateral transfers, and this financial account or the capital account was divided into the portfolio investment and foreign direct investment. These were the two major parts of this financial or capital account. But we didn't explore that what are different factors that would affect the current account, or what are different factors that would affect the individual component of the current account and the factors that would affect the individual components of the financial account. Say, for example, in current account, we have international trade. We didn't explore that what factors would increase international trade or would decrease international trade? What factors would lead to a surplus in the international trade account or deficit in the international trade account? What are those factors? I mean, within financial account, we had foreign direct investment, but we didn't explore that what would be the factors that would increase the foreign direct investment. So these are the factors that we are going to discuss. So mainly our focus would be on the determinants, on the factors affecting the international trade, factors affecting the foreign direct investment, and the factors investing portfolio investment. So starting with the first aspect, which is the factors investing international trade flow. Now, you remember that international trade flow had to do with exports and imports. And if exports were greater than imports, then we had surplus, financial international account surplus or balance of trade surplus. Uh, and if we had imports were greater than exports, then we had international trade deficit or balance of trade deficit. And the major component of current account is this international trade. And this is the focus of major news articles you would encounter. So current account is the main factor. Okay, so what are the factors that would increase international trade, or in simple words, what factors would increase trade exports and what would decrease exports? So first of these factors is inflation. So as inflation increases, the export of the country with higher inflation would decrease. Now, first thing we must consider, and I have demonstrated this thing previously, is that when we say increase in inflation, then what we really mean is the relative increase. So, for example, if Pakistan's inflation increases by, for example, 2%, right? But similarly, the US inflation also increases by 2%, then relatively Pakistan inflation have not increased. So by relatively we mean inflation as compared to the other countries. Um, as compared to this scenario, let's assume that Pakistan inflation have increased by 9%, but US inflation only increased by 2%. So the difference is of 7%. So that means relatively Pakistan inflation as relative to US have increased by 7%, or as compared to US it has increased by 7%. So we are more concerned with this relative increase rather than this absolute increase. Okay, so if a country's inflation rate increases relative to the inflation rate of another country, then its current account will expect a decrease. So in this case, if this is the scenario, Pakistan's inflation is increasing by 9% and US inflation increasing by 2%, then Pakistan's export would decrease. Now, why is that so? The reason is that by inflation we mean the increase in general prices of the commodities, right? So what consumer would do is if the commodity prices increases locally, then they would shift um, their purchasing or consumption of foreign goods. So as compared to local, foreign goods would be cheaper. So, so it means that if inflation increases, exports would decrease and imports would increase. So increase in inflation would lead to increase in imports and a decrease in exports, right? So this is one of the reason that would change international trade account or current account. The second reason is national income. So increase in income might increase consumption and imports. So what this means is that if country's income increases, again, this would be a relative increase in income. So its current account would expect a decrease. And the reason is that what we are assuming is that when the income level of a country increases, then its consumer would buy more foreign goods and hence the imports would increase, right? So this is what this statement is saying, that increase in income might increase consumption of imported goods. So hence we would have a current account deficit. Next we have government policies, and uh, by government policy we mean that there are some some tools that government can use to increase or decrease exports. So, for example, one of the tool that government have is subsidy for exporters. Uh, so in China, there is subsidy on land, there is subsidy uh, on loan. So any firm that produces goods that would then be exported to other countries would get subsidy on loan from government. They would get subsidy on the purchase of land or its rents. So, so what essentially government is doing is by introducing this subsidy, it is trying to boost its exports. It's trying to increase the exports. So these are exports um, uh, are increasing due to the subsidy. For example, in Pakistan, the government creates some economic zones. So in KP we have this Gadun Amazai zone where there is tax subsidy. Similarly, in UAE there is different ports where there is subsidy on different costs. Then there is subsidy by government on, say, for example, electricity. So, so essentially, what would happen is that our exports would become cheaper for the foreign countries, and hence our export would increase, right? So these are some of the ways that government use. So next is a restriction on imports. So the restriction on imports can be imposed through tariff or quotas. So what do we mean by tariff is that what government does is that it imposes some kind of a fee, right? An extra fee. For example, if you import some electronic products or, for example, car, then there would be some custom that a fee that you would have to pay. That normally happens then. So on car there is a 200% tariff, right, or custom. So why the government is imposing these restrictions, these custom duties or tariff on these imports? The reason is to reduce imports so that the import would decrease, right? And when the import would decrease, obviously the currency of that specific country would appreciate, or it wouldn't have downward pressure, um, or sometimes the government imposes these restrictions to save the local industry. So they want to save the local car manufacturing or assembling factories, right? Similar to tariff, there is one more way that the government can impose restrictions on imports is quotas. So government would announce a quota. For example, this normally happens related to certain uh, chemicals or medical products. So what they do is that they would say that no more than this amount of that product can be imported. So for example, let's say government says that we can only import 1 lakh cars a year. So if that quota is fulfilled, um, then there would be no more imports. So there is a restrictions by the way of quotas. Then there is a lack of restriction on privacy, and this is an interesting one. Rather than imposing restriction to decrease imports, what government can do is not imposing any restrictions. For example, in Pakistan, you would notice, and in China and some other developing countries, you would notice there are lack of restrictions on piracy, right? So you would find the different softwares being sold in local markets on DVDs or CDs or through different medium, uh, and the government is not restricting these private piracy activities. The reason is that if these piracy activities are restricted, then the government knows that consumers would have to buy them from the foreign countries, and hence if they buy that software, for example, consumers buying the Windows from Microsoft or other softwares from foreign countries would increase the import bill, right? So rather than imposing restrictions, the lack of restrictions can also lead towards the decrease in imports. So this is what we have already discussed, and the last one is the exchange rate. So sometimes the government might change exchange rate in order to affect international trade. For example, if the currency strengthens, so for example, rather than rupees 200 per dollar, we have rupees 100 per dollar. Now, in that case, goods imported by that country become more expensive to the importing country. As a consequence, the demand of such goods will decrease. So, by the way of changing the exchange rate, what the government can do is they can affect the trade, the exports and imports. But this would only happen if that product is price sensitive. And by price sensitive, we mean that, for example, if there are certain vaccines or life-saving medicines that are essentially needed by the consumers, then irrespective of increase in the price or increase in exchange rate, that product being getting expensive, the consumer would still buy them because those products are price insensitive. Okay. Okay, when we go through these news articles or even in our discussion in previous lectures, we somehow have given an impression that the balance of trade uh, should be in surplus, and that's a good thing. This is the impression that we have developed. So we always want to see this balance of trade in surplus. We always want to see exports being greater than imports, but that is not necessary. That balance of trade deficit is not necessarily a problem, and the reason being is that um, when the local goods are expensive and people are buying less expensive or cheaper products from other countries, that that would lead to a balance of trade deficit. But again, that is giving a relief to the people, right? So it's not necessary that it is a problem. And one more thing is that um sometimes the foreign products are more more advanced technologically, so that would give the local consumers an opportunity to explore those products. But obviously, it would have some disadvantage. A balance of trade deficit uh, would shift the jobs from our country to the foreign countries, because if we are importing the products from another country, uh, then essentially their manufacturing or factories would produce more products, and they would need uh, more people to produce those products, and hence the the demand for jobs would increase in foreign countries and it would decrease in our country. So it essentially would so a more purchase of foreign products or more imports would shift the jobs from our country to the foreign country. So what I mean to say is that it's not necessary that balance of trade is a deficit is a wrong thing, but it is a uh, double-edged sword. Right? Okay, one more perception that we have developed is that if our currency is cheaper, right, that would uh, that would increase our exports, right? And the simple reason is that assume that if product A costs 100 rupees, and if $1 is equal to 100 rupees, then a US consumer can only buy one product A for $1, right? But imagine if this product remains at the same price, that is rupees 100 per product, but the exchange rate changes. Now instead of $1 being at 100 rupees, it is at 200 rupees. Then that means this US consumer can buy two products for single dollar. So this had always given an impression to us that a weaker currency would increase exports because our product would become cheaper to the foreign countries. But in this slide, we would like to explore that why weak currency is not necessarily a perfect solution. Right? One of the reason is that there is counter pricing by competitor, and what counter pricing means that although our product has become cheaper to the foreign consumers, at the same time the other companies uh, would decrease their prices, right? And hence the counter pricing, the decrease in pricing by the competitor would again lead to a similar situation that we already had, except that now we have a weaker currency, right? The second reason is that impact of other weak currencies. Now, one thing we need to understand is that if rupees is depreciating against dollar, then it doesn't necessarily mean that it would depreciate against all the other currencies. It might appreciate against certain currencies and at the same time depreciate against other currencies. So for example, if rupees get strengthened, then although for US consumer, Pakistani products would be more expensive, but at the same time, it might happen that other currencies, say Indian currency or Chinese currency, might depreciate as compared to the dollar. And hence, although Pakistani products have got expensive because of the rupee strengthening, but the Chinese product would have got uh, less expensive because the other currencies are getting weaker, right? Okay. Uh, the last aspect is that pre-arranged international transaction, and what this means is that most of the international transaction, international trade are between the parent and the subsidiary companies. For example, if the Pakistan Suzuki company, Suzuki Motors, uh, is assembling a car, then they need to import products from their parent company in Japan, for example. Now, irrespective of the currency being strengthening or weakening, they obviously are going to purchase the vehicle parts from their parent company. Obviously, they are not going to purchase it from other competitors. So, irrespective of this weakening of the currency, even if you weaken the currency, this this import of Pakistan Suzuki Motors is not going to shift, uh, right? So, so the international trade that is pre-arranged, either it is within the subsidiary or it had already been arranged with other companies, not necessarily with the subsidiary, would not shift. And therefore, we have this interesting graph, um, this J curve. And what this J curve shows is that, let me remove this. It shows that if the currency had depreciated at this time period, the the country's trade, I mean, we know that if currency depreciate, then its exports would increase, right? So if currency depreciate, its export would increase, right? But what this J curve tells us is that if currency depreciates today, if Pakistani currencies depreciate today, its export would not necessarily increase immediately. It would take some time to increase, but before that, it would get a decrease. The exports might decrease, or the balance of trade might get a deficit for the short term because the Pakistani rupees have depreciated, and because the Pakistani imports would have got more expensive. Okay, next we have factors affecting the FDI, foreign direct investment. So, what are the factors that would increase the foreign direct investment or decrease it? One of the factors is that changes in restrictions. So, during this late 80s and 90s, most of the countries reduced their restrictions on the foreign direct investment. So, previously, the countries would have some sort of restrictions on foreign direct investment so that the foreign country or the foreign company would not have much control over the local assets, um, especially in China or in other countries. There were restrictions on FDI, and that opened. So if there are restrictions by the government on FDI, that the FDI cannot come, or that uh, uh, so that would lead towards the decrease in foreign direct investment. The second aspect or factor is privatization. So when when a country privatizes its assets, so if privatization increases, that would mean that government is selling its own companies. For example, in Pakistan, most of the banks, the HBL, UBL, MCB, Allied Bank, they were all government entities like we have National Bank nowadays. As National Bank is a government entity, previously in 90s, uh, these other banks, the Allied Bank, HBL, and other banks, were also government entities. And later on, government decided to sell them to private firms. Okay, so this is called privatization. For example, PIA is being privatized. For example, Pakistan Steel Mill is being privatized. PTCL was privatized few years back. So when a country would privatize its government entities, what would happen is that foreign companies would come and buy those obviously entities, and that would bring foreign direct investment. For example, when the government of Pakistan privatized PTCL, Etisalat, the UAE telecommunication company, purchased some shares in the PTCL. So that obviously bought foreign direct investment. Then there is potential for economic growth, and what this means is that countries that have greater potential for economic growth would have more chances to attract foreign direct investment, because the investors would realize that if they invest in these growing economies, they would obviously capitalize on this opportunity and a higher return on their investment. Then we have low tax rates. Countries that have lower tax rates, foreign investor would obviously want to buy, would obviously want to invest in these countries. So foreign direct investment would increase if there are lower tax rates. And the last factor in that affect FDI is the strengthening of exchange rate. What this means is that if investors anticipate that the country's currency would strengthen, it would increase in value, then what would they want is they would want to increase the FDI. Why is that? So, for example, if we consider an example of a US investor and he invests $1,000 in Pakistan, and the investor anticipates that the currency, the Pakistani rupee, would appreciate. For example, now it's 200 rupees per dollar. So by investing this 1000, this investor would essentially invest how many rupees? It would be 2 lakh rupees, right? But if this investor is anticipating that this currency would appreciate, by appreciate we mean that uh, I mean it would now be able to buy $1 for 100 rupees. So, for example, if he invested the amount in 2020 and he want to take this amount back to its home country in 2021, and now the currency have appreciated, then he would be able to buy $2,000 rather than $1,000. And this increase is not because of the profit he earned from by doing business, but just by the increase in the exchange rate, by this by exchange rate getting strengthened. Okay, then we have factors affecting international portfolio investment. And as we discussed in the case of FDI, the uh, the tax rate also plays an important role in case of portfolio investment. Now, if you remember, portfolio investment was that the investors would buy some stocks or bonds in our home country. So, if there is lower tax rate or interest and dividend uh, rather than other aspects, but on dividend and interest on the factor income, uh, then foreign investors would try to buy more bonds or shares in the lower tax rate countries, because then they would know that their income, that their dividend would have lesser cost as compared to other countries. Similarly, we have higher interest rate, and this we have discussed multiple times in previous lectures of balance of payment. And it says that if interest rate increases, then the international portfolio investment will increase. And we saw that when Pakistan had higher interest rate in previous few months before March 2020, uh, then it attracted more international portfolio investment. And then we have increase in value of currency, and this is similar to the strengthening of currency that we discussed in previous slide. And it means is that if the investor anticipates that the currency would strengthen, then he would invest in that country. Okay, so this is the end of this topic, the balance of payment, and in next lecture we would start a new chapter.